Jake Morrison had lived aboard Unity Station for nearly 2 years now. He worked as an engineer in the lower decks, fixing broken pipes and keeping the air systems running smoothly. It was honest work, and he liked it well enough. The pay was good, the food was decent, and the view of the stars from the observation deck never got old. But the best part of his life on the station was his roommate. Zithos was a Velkari, one of the reptilian species from the outer rim of the galaxy. He stood about 7 feet tall, with shimmering scales that changed color depending on his mood. He had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his face, and when he smiled, rows of small, sharp teeth showed. Most humans found the Velkari frightening at first glance. Jake had felt the same way when he first met Zithos 8 months ago. But Zithos had turned out to be the best roommate Jake had ever had. He was quiet and clean. He never left dirty dishes in the sink. He always paid his share of the utility costs on time. And most surprisingly, he had developed a deep love for old Earth television shows. Many nights, Jake would come home from work to find Zithos watching ancient sitcoms from the 20th century, his 4 eyes glued to the screen while he tried to understand human humor. "I do not understand," Zithos would say, tilting his head. "Why is it funny that the man fell into the swimming pool?" Jake would try to explain, and usually fail, and they would both end up laughing anyway. It was a good life, simple and peaceful. Jake had started to think of Zithos not just as a roommate, but as a genuine friend, perhaps even his best friend on the entire station. That made what happened next even harder. It was a Tuesday evening, or what passed for Tuesday on a space station where the concept of days was mostly artificial. Jake had just finished a 12-hour shift repairing a coolant leak in Sector 7. His back hurt. His hands were sore. All he wanted was a hot meal and a warm bed. He pressed his palm against the door panel and stepped into the quarters he shared with Zithos. The lights were dim, which was unusual. Zithos normally kept the room well lit. Jake blinked, letting his eyes adjust. "Zithos, you home, buddy?" He found the Velkari standing in the center of the living room. Zithos was completely still, which was strange because he usually moved with a fluid, casual grace. His scales were flickering through colors Jake had never seen before. Deep reds, bright oranges, pulsing yellows. It looked like fire was dancing across his body. And there was a sound, a low humming that seemed to come from deep inside Zithos's chest. It vibrated through the air and made Jake's teeth ache. "Zithos?" Jake said again, more carefully this time. "Are you okay?" Zithos turned his head slowly. All 4 of his eyes were dilated, the pupils blown wide. When he spoke, his voice was different, deeper, rougher. The translation device he wore struggled to keep up with the strange undertones. "Jake," Zithos said, "I must tell you something important. I have made a mistake. A serious mistake." Jake felt his stomach drop. In all the months they had lived together, he had never heard Zithos sound like this. The Velkari was usually calm and composed, almost unflappable. Now he seemed barely able to control himself. His claws kept flexing, scratching against the metal floor with a sound like knives on stone. "What kind of mistake?" Jake asked. Zithos reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small data tablet. His hands were shaking as he handed it to Jake. "Read this, please. You need to understand what is about to happen." Jake took the tablet and looked at the screen. It displayed a document written in both Velkari script and translated English. The title made his blood run cold. Velkari Reproductive Cycle and Associated Behavioral Changes. He scrolled through the document quickly, his eyes growing wider with each paragraph. The information was clinical and detailed, written in the dry language of scientists and doctors. But the meaning was clear enough. Every 3 standard years, Velkari entered what they called the burning time. It was their mating season, a period of approximately 14 days, when their bodies were flooded with hormones and ancient instincts. During this time, unmated Velkari became aggressive, territorial, dangerous. They experienced an overwhelming need to hunt and to claim. Their senses became sharper, their strength increased dramatically, and their higher thinking became clouded by primal urges. The document noted that during the burning time, Velkari did not normally find other species attractive or desirable. But it also noted in bold letters that the hormone-induced state could cause the instincts to become less selective. Anything that moved, anything that breathed, anything that could be caught might become a target. Jake lowered the tablet and looked at his friend. Zythos was staring at him with those 4 dilated eyes, and for the first time since they had met, Jake felt afraid. "How long?" Jake asked. His voice came out steady, which surprised him. "The cycle lasts 14 days, Zythos said. "I thought I had more time. I was planning to transfer to a solo quarters unit before it began, but I miscalculated. The stress of recent work must have triggered it early." He paused, and something that looked like pain crossed his alien features. "It begins in 6 hours, Jake. Perhaps less. 6 hours. Jake did the math in his head. Not enough time to arrange a transfer. Not enough time to find somewhere else to stay. The station was crowded right now because of some big diplomatic conference. Every spare room was taken. "Can you control it?" Jake asked. "Fight against it somehow?" Zythos let out a sound that might have been a laugh, but it came out wrong. Too sharp, too hungry. "I will try. I promise you, I will try with everything I have. But Jake, you must understand. When the burning time takes hold, I will not be myself. I will not think like myself. I will not remember our friendship or our conversations or the television shows we watched together." He stepped closer, and Jake forced himself not to step back. "I will only remember one thing," Zythos continued. "The hunt. The need to chase, to catch, to claim." His scales pulsed a deep bloody red. "I will hunt you, Jake. And I am very, very good at hunting." Jake stood there in the dim room, looking at his friend who was slowly becoming something else. He thought about everything they had shared over the past 8 months. The meals, the jokes, the late nights watching television and talking about their homes and their families and their dreams. Then he took a deep breath and squared his shoulders. "Okay," Jake said. "Then I guess I better start getting ready." Zythos blinked all 4 eyes in surprise. "You are not going to run? Not going to call security? Not going to demand I be locked away?" Jake shook his head. "You're my friend, Zythos. You warned me. You're trying to protect me even now. I'm not going to abandon you just because things are about to get difficult." He managed a small smile. "Besides, humans are tougher than we look. We've been surviving alongside predators for thousands of years." He held up the data tablet. "Now tell me everything else I need to know." "We've got 6 hours to prepare." The next 5 hours were the busiest of Jake's entire life. He started by asking Zythos questions. Lots of questions. The Velkari was still lucid enough to answer, though his voice grew rougher, and his scales flickered more intensely with each passing minute. Jake recorded everything on his personal device, knowing he would need to review the information later when things got bad. "Tell me about your senses," Jake said. "What will you be able to detect?" Zythos closed 2 of his eyes, concentrating. "Heat. I will see heat signatures through walls, through doors, through most materials. Your body is warm. It will glow like a beacon to me." Jake nodded and made a note. Heat signature. Problem number 1. "What else?" "Sound. My hearing will become very sharp." I will hear your heartbeat from 30 meters away. I will hear your footsteps no matter how softly you walk. I will hear you breathing, even if you try to hold your breath. Jake made another note. Sound. Problem number 2. And smell? Zethos opened all 4 eyes. They seemed even more dilated now than before. Smell is the most dangerous. Your species has a distinct scent, sweat, skin, blood. I will be able to track you through the station by smell alone. Even if you hide, even if you stay perfectly still and silent, if I catch your scent, I will find you. Jake swallowed hard. Smell. Problem number 3. Anything else I should know? Zethos was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I will be stronger, much stronger. During the burning time, a Velkari can tear through metal doors. I will be faster, too. You cannot outrun me, Jake. You cannot fight me. Your only chance is to hide so well that I never find you. Jake saved the recording and stood up. He had a lot of work to do, and not much time to do it. His first stop was the station's supply depot. He used his engineering credentials to access areas that normal crew members could not reach. He found what he was looking for in a storage locker marked for emergency equipment. Thermal blankets, designed to mask heat signatures during rescue operations in hostile environments. They were made of a special material that trapped body heat inside instead of letting it radiate outward. Jake grabbed as many as he could carry. His next stop was the medical bay. The night shift doctor, a tired woman named Grace, looked at him with confusion when he asked for industrial-strength scent neutralizers. These are usually used for contamination cleanup, she said. Why do you need them? Jake hesitated. He did not want to cause panic, and he did not want anyone to lock Zethos up like a dangerous animal. Personal project, he said finally. Can't really talk about it. Grace raised an eyebrow but handed over the supplies anyway. Engineers were known for their strange requests. Jake also grabbed medical supplies while he was there. Bandages, painkillers, water purification tablets. He had no idea if he would need them, but his grandmother had always told him that it was better to have something and not need it than to need something and not have it. His grandmother. Jake thought about her as he hurried through the station corridors with his arms full of supplies. She had grown up in rural Montana in a small cabin surrounded by wilderness, bears, mountain lions, wolves. She had learned to live alongside predators from a young age. You can't always be the strongest, she used to say, and you can't always be the fastest, but you can always be the smartest. You can always be the most prepared. Jake intended to be both. He returned to his quarters and found Zethos sitting in the corner, hugging his knees to his chest. The Velkari's scales were now a solid deep red, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. He looked up when Jake entered, and there was fear in his 4 eyes. You came back, Zethos said. I thought you might not. I told you I would. Jake set down his supplies and knelt in front of his friend. How are you feeling? It is getting harder to think. The instincts are waking up. I can smell you, Jake. You smell like... He trailed off, shaking his head violently. I do not want to say what you smell like. It frightens me. Jake put a hand on the Velkari's shoulder. The scales were hot to the touch, almost feverish. Listen to me. We're going to get through this. Both of us. I'm going to hide, and you're going to hunt, and in 14 days this will all be over, and we'll watch television together like nothing happened, okay? Zethos let out a shaky breath. You are strange, Jake. Morrison. Any other species would have run away by now. Yeah, well... Jake stood up and began organizing his supplies. Humans are stubborn like that. He spent the next 2 hours preparing. He wrapped himself in thermal blankets and used the medical scanner from his engineering kit to check if his heat signature was hidden. It worked. The blankets made him nearly invisible to thermal detection. He tested the scent neutralizers by rubbing them on his skin and having Zythos try to smell him. The Velkari sniffed the air and frowned. "I can barely detect you. It is strange. Like you are there but not there." Good. 2 problems solved. Sound was harder. There was no way to silence his heartbeat or his breathing completely. But Jake had another idea. He pulled up the station's maintenance schedules on his device and memorized the timing of all the mechanical systems in their section. The air recyclers, the water pumps, the power conduits. Every few minutes, these systems made noise. If Jake timed his movements to match those sounds, he might be able to mask his own footsteps. Finally, he mapped out every possible hiding spot in their section of the station. Maintenance shafts, storage closets, ventilation ducts, emergency access tunnels. He identified dozens of places where he could hide, and he planned routes between them that would let him move without being seen. As he worked, he noticed Zythos becoming more and more agitated. The Velkari had started pacing around the room, his claws clicking against the floor. His breathing was heavy and ragged. He kept sniffing the air, even though Jake was covered in scent neutralizers. "Jake," Zythos said suddenly. His voice was different now, deeper, more guttural. "You need to go. Now." "It is starting." Jake looked at his friend and saw that the last traces of recognition were fading from those 4 eyes. Something else was taking over, something old and hungry and utterly without mercy. "Thank you for warning me," Jake said. "I'll see you in 2 weeks." He grabbed his bag of supplies and headed for the door. Behind him, he heard Zythos let out a sound that was half growl and half roar. The hunt was beginning. Jake stepped into the corridor and immediately turned down a side passage. He had already decided that his first hiding spot would be in a maintenance shaft 3 levels below their quarters. It was cramped and uncomfortable, but it had multiple exit routes in case he needed to escape quickly. As he walked, he heard the door to their quarters slide open behind him. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. And then he heard it. A deep, rumbling voice calling out in the ancient Velkari tongue. Jake did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning perfectly well. "Ready or not, here I come." He broke into a run. The first 3 days were a nightmare. Jake learned very quickly that surviving against a hunting Velkari was nothing like the adventure stories he had read as a child. There was no excitement, no thrill, only fear. Only exhaustion, only the constant grinding terror of knowing that something was searching for him and that if it found him, there would be no escape. He slept in 2-hour shifts, curled up in maintenance shafts or hidden behind equipment in storage rooms. He never slept in the same place twice. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard sounds, footsteps in distant corridors, claws scraping against metal walls, and sometimes echoing through the ventilation system, a long and terrible howl. Zythos was hunting, and he was hunting hard. Jake ate cold rations. Heating food would create smells that might attract attention, so he forced himself to chew through protein bars and dried fruit that tasted like cardboard. He drank water from the emergency supply station scattered throughout the station, always checking carefully before approaching to make sure nothing was waiting nearby. He moved mostly through the ventilation system. The ducts were small and cramped, barely wide enough for a human to crawl through. A Velkari would never fit inside them. That made them safe, but it also made them uncomfortable. Jake's knees became bruised and sore from crawling. His back ached from the constant hunching. More than once, he had to stop and rest in the darkness, listening to the distant sounds of his hunter prowling through the corridors below. The thermal blankets worked well. Whenever Jake heard Zethos approaching, he would wrap himself tightly and press against a wall, becoming invisible to heat vision. He could hear the Velkari passing by, sometimes only a few feet away. The heavy footsteps, the deep, rumbling breathing, the occasional sniff as Zethos searched for any trace of his prey. Each time, Jake held his breath and prayed. Each time, Zethos moved on. But the scent neutralizers were a problem. They worked for a few hours, but then they started to fade. Jake had to reapply them constantly, using up his limited supply faster than he had planned. By the end of the second day, he was already running low. He needed to find more. On the third night, Jake made his way to the medical bay. He had memorized the shift schedules and knew that the bay would be minimally staffed at this hour. He crawled through a ventilation duct and dropped down into a supply closet, moving as quietly as he could. The closet was dark. Jake pulled out a small light and began searching the shelves. Medical supplies, bandages, surgical equipment. Where were the scent neutralizers? He found them on the bottom shelf behind a box of cleaning supplies. He grabbed as many containers as he could fit in his bag and turned to leave. That was when he heard it. Click, click, click. Claws on metal, getting closer. Jake froze. He had been careful. He had checked the corridor before entering. How had Zethos found him? Then he realized. The supply closet had a ventilation grate. And ventilation systems carried smells. His scent neutralizers had worn off almost an hour ago. He had been leaving a trail. Stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. The footsteps stopped right outside the closet door. Jake could hear breathing on the other side. Heavy. Hungry. He pressed himself against the back wall and wrapped the thermal blanket around his body, even though he knew it would not help if Zethos already had his scent. The door handle moved. Slowly. Testing. Jake's heart was pounding so hard he was sure Zethos could hear it. He remembered what his friend had told him. I will hear your heartbeat from 30 meters away. There was no way to hide now, no way to run. The door was the only exit. He was trapped. The door slid open. Zethos stood in the doorway, his massive form blocking out the light from the corridor. His scales were blazing red and orange, pulsing with a rhythm that matched Jake's own racing heartbeat. All four eyes were fixed on the closet, scanning, searching. Jake did not move, did not breathe. He was wrapped in his thermal blanket, invisible to heat vision. But Zethos had his scent. The Velkari knew he was here. It was only a matter of time. Zethos stepped into the closet. He was so close now that Jake could feel the heat radiating from his scales. The Velkari leaned forward, sniffing the air. His nostrils flared. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Then something strange happened. Zethos tilted his head. His four eyes narrowed. He sniffed again, deeper this time. And then he let out a sound of frustration. The industrial lubricant. Jake almost laughed out loud. Before leaving his quarters 3 days ago, he had smeared himself with industrial lubricant from the engineering bay. The stuff smelled terrible, like burnt metal and chemicals. He had done it as a backup plan, in case the scent neutralizers failed. And now that backup plan was saving his life. Zethos could smell that something was in the closet. But the overwhelming stench of industrial lubricant was masking Jake's human scent. The Velkari knew prey was nearby, but he could not pinpoint exactly where. For 3 agonizing minutes, Zethos searched the closet. He knocked over boxes. He swept his claws across shelves. He sniffed every corner. But Jake stayed pressed against the wall, wrapped in his thermal blanket, covered in foul-smelling lubricant, and somehow, impossibly, remained hidden. Finally, Zethos let out another frustrated growl and left the closet. Jake heard his footsteps fade down the corridor, heading toward another section of the station. Jake did not move for another 10 minutes. When he finally allowed himself to breathe again, his entire body was shaking. Tears were running down his face, and he did not know if they were from fear or relief or both. But he was alive. He was still alive. He gathered his supplies and climbed back into the ventilation duct. As he crawled through the darkness, he made himself a promise. He would survive this. He would make it through all 14 days. And when it was over, he and Zythos would sit down together and watch stupid television shows and laugh about the time Jake had to cover himself in industrial lubricant to avoid being caught by his roommate. It was a silly thing to hold on to. But in the darkness of that ventilation duct, with the sounds of hunting echoing through the station around him, it was enough. The days crawled by. 4, 5, 6. Jake fell into a routine of hiding and moving and hiding again. He learned to read Zythos's patterns, to predict where the Velkari would search and when. He learned which parts of the station were safe and which were dangerous. He learned to sleep with his eyes half open, ready to move at the first sound of approaching footsteps. He also learned something else, something that surprised him. Zythos was suffering, not physically. The burning time made Velkari stronger and faster and more alert than ever. But Jake could see in the few glimpses he caught of his roommate that something was wrong. Zythos was not eating properly. His scales, which should have been bright and vibrant, were starting to look dull. His movements, which should have been smooth and graceful, were becoming jerky and uncoordinated. The hunting instinct was consuming him. It was all he could think about, all he could focus on. Everything else, including basic self-care, had been forgotten. Jake watched his friend suffering, and he made a decision. He was not just going to survive this, he was going to help. On the 7th day, Jake started leaving food. It was a crazy idea. Maybe the craziest idea he had ever had. But he could not stop thinking about how bad Zythos looked. The Velkari was wasting away. His scales had lost their shine. His movements were slower. His hunting had become sloppy and desperate, driven more by instinct than intelligence. Zythos was starving himself in his obsession to catch Jake, so Jake decided to do something about it. He started small, a ration pack left in a corridor where he knew Zythos would pass. Jake hid in a ventilation duct overhead and watched as the Velkari found the food. Zythos sniffed it suspiciously at first. Then hunger won out over caution. He tore open the package and devoured the contents in seconds. It worked. Zythos ate. Jake started doing it every day. He would prepare a meal from his own limited supplies and leave it somewhere along Zythos's hunting route. Then he would hide and watch to make sure his friend found it. Sometimes Zythos would eat immediately. Sometimes he would carry the food away to consume later, but he always ate. By the 9th day, Jake noticed that Zythos's scales were starting to look better. The color was returning. The dull, sickly appearance was fading. Whatever damage the starvation had been causing was slowly being repaired. But Jake was not satisfied. He wanted to do more. He remembered how Zythos used to love their conversations. The Velkari had always been curious about humans, about Earth, about the strange things that Jake's species did and believed. They would stay up late talking about everything and nothing, and Zythos would ask endless questions with those 4 bright eyes full of wonder. That gave Jake another crazy idea. He recorded himself talking, just casual stuff at first, stories about his childhood in Montana, memories of his grandmother, descriptions of what Earth was like, the mountains and the rivers, and the endless blue sky. He talked about the television shows they used to watch together. He talked about jokes that Zythos had never quite understood. Then he set up the recordings to play on a loop in empty rooms throughout the station. The first time Zythos heard Jake's voice coming from behind a door, the Velkari went into a frenzy. He tore the door open, expecting to find his prey. Instead, he found only a small speaker playing a recording of Jake talking about his favorite pizza toppings. Jake watched from a safe distance, expecting Zythos to destroy the speaker in frustration. But something strange happened instead. Zythos sat down. He sat down in front of that speaker and listened to Jake's voice. His scales, which had been blazing red with hunting fury, slowly shifted to softer colors. Blues and greens, calmer shades. The tension drained from his body. His breathing slowed. For almost an hour, Zythos just sat there and listened. Jake did not understand it. The burning time was supposed to override all higher thinking. Zythos should not have been able to feel anything except the need to hunt, but somehow Jake's voice was reaching him. Somewhere deep inside the hunting madness, some part of Zythos still remembered their friendship. Jake set up more speakers throughout the station. He recorded hours of content, stories, jokes, random thoughts, even readings from a book about the history of Earth's space exploration program. Whenever Zythos found one of these speakers, he would stop and listen, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. The hunting became less intense. Zythos still searched for Jake, still prowled the corridors with those 4 predator eyes scanning for any sign of prey. But there were longer breaks now. Times when the Velkari would simply sit and listen to his friend's voice, and for a little while, he seemed almost peaceful. On the 10th day, something else happened. Lieutenant Amy Chen from Station Security showed up at one of Jake's hiding spots. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Jake had known her casually before all this started. She was good at her job and took the safety of the station seriously. "Morrison," she said, her voice low, "we need to talk." Jake tensed. He had been avoiding contact with other crew members. He did not want anyone to interfere. "What about?" "Your roommate, the Velkari. We've been monitoring the situation." She paused. "Some of the crew are getting nervous. They want us to sedate him. Lock him up until this is over." Jake felt anger rise in his chest. "No." "Excuse me?" "I said no." Jake stepped closer to the security officer, his exhaustion forgotten. "Zythos warned me about this. He tried to protect me. He's not some dangerous animal that needs to be caged. He's a person going through a difficult biological process that he has no control over." Amy studied him for a long moment. "You've been running from him for 10 days, hiding in maintenance shafts, eating cold food, barely sleeping. And you're defending him? He's my friend. He's trying to hunt you down. He can't help it." Jake shook his head. "Look, I know this seems crazy, but I'm handling it. I've figured out how to stay hidden. I'm even helping him, leaving food and recordings to keep him calm. We're going to get through this together." Amy was quiet. Then she let out a long breath. "You humans really are something else, you know that?" "So I've been told." "Fine." She held up her hands. "We'll hold off on the sedation. But if anything goes wrong, if there's any sign that you're in serious danger, we're stepping in. Understood?" Jake nodded. "Understood. Thank you, Lieutenant." After Amy left, Jake went back to his routine, hiding, moving, leaving food, playing recordings, taking care of his friend while staying out of his reach. On the 12th day, something remarkable happened. Jake was hidden in a storage room, wrapped in his thermal blanket, when Zythos entered. The Velkari moved slowly, sniffing the air. His scales were cycling through soft colors now, not the aggressive reds of the early days. He looked almost calm. Zathos walked to a spot near where Jake was hiding and sat down. Then, to Jake's astonishment, he started talking. His voice was rough and broken, the words coming out in fragments. The translator struggled to keep up, but Jake could understand enough. "Jake, friend, I know you can hear me. Somewhere. The recordings, the food, I know it is you." Jake stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. "I am sorry. So sorry. I did not want this, did not want to hunt you. You are good, kind. You stayed when others would run." Zathos let out a sound that might have been a sob. "4 more days. Only 4 more days. Then I will be myself again. Please, please survive. I could not bear it if I hurt you." Jake felt tears running down his face. He wanted to reach out, to tell Zathos that it was okay, that he understood, that they would get through this together. But he could not. Not yet. 4 more days. Zathos sat in silence for a long time. Then he slowly stood and left the room. As he walked away, Jake heard him whisper one more word. "Friend." Jake stayed hidden until he was sure Zathos was gone. Then he wiped his eyes and got back to work. 4 more days. He could do this. For Zathos, he could do anything. The 15th day dawned like any other. Jake woke up in a maintenance shaft on level 7, his body aching from 2 weeks of sleeping on metal floors. His supplies were almost gone. His thermal blanket was worn thin from constant use. The industrial lubricant he had been using to mask his scent had been depleted days ago, forcing him to rely entirely on the scent neutralizers and his knowledge of Zathos's patterns. But he had made it. 14 days. He had survived 14 days. Jake crawled out of the maintenance shaft and made his way carefully through the corridors. The station was quiet. The normal background noises of machinery and conversation seemed muted, as if everyone was holding their breath. Jake realized that the entire crew had probably been watching his situation unfold, waiting to see how it would end. He reached the door to his quarters and stopped. His heart was beating fast, not from fear this time, but from hope. And maybe a little bit of nervousness. What if Zathos was still in the burning time? What if it had lasted longer than expected? What if Jake opened this door and found the hunter still waiting on the other side? He took a deep breath. Only one way to find out. Jake pressed his palm against the door panel. The door slid open. The quarters looked different than he remembered. The furniture had been knocked over. Claw marks covered the walls. The television screen where they used to watch sitcoms together was cracked and dark. 2 weeks of hunting frenzy had taken their toll on the space. But Jake barely noticed any of that. All he could see was Zathos. The Velkari was sitting in the corner of the room, his arms wrapped around his knees, his 4 eyes staring at the floor. His scales were back to their normal blue-green color, soft and muted and tired. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, like the burning time had taken something vital out of him. He looked up when Jake entered, and the expression on his alien face was one that Jake would never forget. Shame, grief, and underneath it all, a desperate, fragile hope. "Jake," Zathos whispered. His voice was hoarse. "You are alive." "Yeah." Jake stepped into the room, letting the door close behind him. "I am. I remember things. Fragments. The hunt. The corridors. The closet where I almost found you." Zathos closed his eyes, and a shudder ran through his body. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry." Jake walked across the damaged room and sat down on the floor across from his friend. Up close, he could see how much weight Zathos had lost. Even with Jake leaving food every day, the burning time had burned through the Velkari's reserves. He looked exhausted and fragile and broken. Hey, Jake said softly. Look at me. Zythos opened his eyes. All four of them were glistening with something that might have been tears. It's okay, Jake said. We got through it. Both of us. That's what matters. I hunted you. For 2 weeks, I hunted you like you were prey. Like you were nothing. How can you say that is okay? Jake thought about his answer carefully. He thought about the terror of those first few days when he had genuinely believed he might not survive. He thought about the close calls, the times Zythos had almost found him, the moment in the supply closet when he had been certain his life was over. But he also thought about other things. The way Zythos had warned him, the way his friend had fought against the burning time, had struggled to maintain some fragment of himself, even when the instincts were overwhelming. The way Zythos had sat and listened to Jake's recordings, finding peace in his friend's voice when everything else was chaos. Because you're my friend, Jake said finally. And friends don't abandon each other when things get hard. Zythos stared at him. No other species would have stayed. I have seen it before, with other Velkari. When the burning time comes, everyone leaves. Roommates, colleagues, even family sometimes. They cannot bear to be near us when we become what we become. I'm not other species. Jake managed a small smile. I'm human. We're stubborn. You left me food. You looked like you needed it. You played recordings of your voice throughout the station. I would find them, and I would listen, and for a little while the hunting would quiet down, and I could almost think again. Zythos's voice cracked. You took care of me. Even while I was hunting you? You took care of me. Jake shrugged. That's what friends do. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Zythos did something unexpected. He reached out with one clawed hand and gently placed it on Jake's shoulder. The grip was careful, almost fragile. Nothing like the predator strength Jake knew those hands possessed. Thank you, Zythos said. Thank you for staying. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for being my friend even when I did not deserve it. Jake put his own hand over Zythos's. Always, buddy. Always. The story spread across Unity Station within hours. By the next day, it had reached the wider network of stations and ships that made up the Galactic community. Within a week, it seemed like everyone in the known universe had heard about the human who had survived 2 weeks of being hunted by his Velkari roommate. But that was not the part of the story that people talked about most. What captured the galaxy's attention was not Jake's survival skills, not his clever use of thermal blankets and scent neutralizers, not his knowledge of the station's maintenance systems. Those things were impressive, certainly, but many species could claim similar abilities. No. What amazed the galaxy was what Jake had done during those 2 weeks. The food he had left, the recordings he had played, the way he had taken care of his friend even while running for his life. A Velkari ambassador named Koroth requested a meeting with Jake. They sat in a quiet conference room, and Koroth studied Jake with all 4 eyes like he was trying to solve a puzzle. I have spoken to Zythos, Koroth said. He told me everything. The preparations you made, the way you hid, the way you helped him, even though helping him put you at greater risk. The ambassador leaned forward. I must ask, how did you do it? How did you survive? Jake thought about the question. He thought about his grandmother in Montana, living alongside bears and mountain lions. He thought about all the stories she had told him about the old days, when humans had no technology and no weapons beyond sharpened sticks and clever minds. Humans spent a long time living with predators, Jake said. Before we had cities, before we had guns, before we had spaceships, we were small and weak and slow, and there were things out there that wanted to eat us. He paused, remembering the terror of those 2 weeks. The constant fear, the exhaustion, the moments when he had been sure he would not make it. "But we survived," Jake continued. "Not by being the strongest, not by being the fastest. We survived by being smart, by adapting, by learning to understand the things that hunted us." He met the ambassador's four-eyed gaze. "And somewhere along the way, we also learned something else." "What?" "That even predators deserve compassion. That something being dangerous doesn't mean it's evil. That fear doesn't have to turn into hatred." Jake smiled. "Zythos is my friend. The burning time didn't change that. It just made things complicated for a while." Koroth was silent for a long moment. Then he made a sound that the translator identified as laughter. "You humans really are remarkable. I had heard stories, but I never quite believed them until now." "We're just stubborn," Jake said, "and maybe a little bit crazy." Later that evening, Jake returned to his quarters. The damage from the burning time had been repaired. The furniture was back in place. The television had been replaced with a new one. Zythos was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels. He looked up when Jake entered and smiled, showing all those small, sharp teeth. "I found a new show," Zythos said. "It is about humans who live in an apartment building and have various comedic misunderstandings." Jake laughed and sat down next to his friend. "Sounds perfect." They watched television together late into the night, and when Jake finally went to bed, he slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Some things, he decided, were worth fighting for, worth hiding for, worth surviving for. Friendship was one of them, and as he drifted off to sleep, Jake could swear he heard Zythos quietly laughing at a joke on the television. Some things never changed, and that, Jake thought, was exactly how it should be.